Daf Yomi, Tractate, Bava Batra, page 131b, top of the page. Continuing from the words of Rav Nechumi, and some say it was Rav Hananya bar Menyumi, said to Abaya. Now we're on top of 131b. Bimaid bechad, beidina itkun, dilma besre beidina itkun. From where do you conclude that both cases, the one for the benefit of the sons and the one for the benefit of the daughters, were instituted by one court, and are therefore each read in light of the other? Perhaps they were instituted by two different courts, and are unrelated to each other. Accordingly, the wording of the gift and the wording of the inheritance are not part of the same statement. Lo sokadai tichtani reisha ze midrash doresh Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah lefnei chachamim bekerem b'Yavne habanim Yehoshua banas yizoinu ma habanim einan yorshin ela la'achar misas avihen af banas lo yizoinu ela la'achar misas avihen. The Gemara answers, this possibility should not enter your mind, as the former clause of that Mishnah teaches in Ketubot 49a, a father is not obligated to provide his daughter's sustenance. This interpretation was interpreted by Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah before the sages of the vineyard in Yavne. Since the sages instituted that after the father's death, the sons inherit the sum of money specified in their mother's marriage contract, and the daughters are sustained from their father's estate, these two halachot are equated. Just as the sons inherit only after their father's death, not during his lifetime, so too the daughters are sustained from their father's property only after their father's death. I amrit b'shlomi v'chad beidina itikun hainu di'alfin tikana min tikana el I amrit b'trei beidina itikun hechi alfin tikana min tikana. The Gemara explains, granted, if you say that the two clauses were instituted by one court, this is the reason that we derive the halachot of one ordinance from the halachot of the other ordinance, under the assumption that a court institutes ordinances in a consistent manner. But if you say that they were instituted by two distinct courts operating in different periods, how can we derive the halachot of one ordinance from the halachot of the other ordinance? Mimai Dilma lo'ilam emelach besrei beidina itikun ubeidina batra takun kebeidina kama kihechet lo tikasha tikanta atikanta. The Gemara rejects this explanation. From where is it assumed that they were instituted by one court? Actually, I will say to you that perhaps the two clauses were instituted by two separate courts, and nevertheless Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah derived the halachot of one ordinance from halachot of one ordinance from the halachot of the other ordinance, because the latter court presumably instituted its ordinance in accordance with the format of the former court, so that one should not ask about contradictions between one ordinance and the other ordinance. With regard to the halachot of inheritance, there is no reason to read the two clauses in light of the other. Amar Rav Yehuda, Amar Shmuel, Lakois, if kol nechasav li ishtoi, lo yasa ela apotropa. Rav Yehuda and Shmuel says, a person on his deathbed who writes a document granting all his property to his wife has merely rendered her a steward. The assumption is that he did not intend to deprive his heirs of their entire inheritance. Rather, he intended to appoint her as a steward in charge of the property, so that the heirs will honor her. Pshita b'nohagdol lo asu ela apitropis b'nokaton mai. The Gemara discusses similar cases. It is obvious that if one writes a document granting all his property to his adult son, he does not intend to give him the entire inheritance. I don't understand why we're reading intentions into his mind. A person should be trusted to intend what he or she is writing. I don't see why we are reading into his mind. He really didn't intend to that. So then, at what level do we say that your intention counts? If I intend to give all the things to my wife and nothing to my sons, then that's what he meant. A person is given the right to say what he means or she means, without us reading meaning into them and making the decision for them to say that they really meant this. If he writes to his minor son, that's just a question I had. Rather, he's merely rendering him a steward. If he writes it to his minor son, what is the halacha? Is it still assumed that his intention is to appoint him as a steward? Or is that implausible, since a minor boy is not yet capable of assuming this position, and therefore the father apparently intended to bequeath to him the entire inheritance? Itmar. Rav Chani Lai bar Idi Amar Shmuel Afilu b'no hakatan mutar bar Isa. It was stated that Rav Chani Lai bar Idi says that Rav Shmuel says that even if one wrote a document granting all his property to his minor son who is lying in his crib, he does not receive the entire inheritance. Rather, the father presumably intended to appoint him as a steward when he reached adulthood, so that the other heirs would honor him. Pshita beno ve'acher, acher b'matana ubeno b'trapus, ishto ve'acher, le'acher b'matana ve'ishto b'trapus. The Gemara states, it is obvious that if one wrote a document granting all his property to his son and another person, he intended to give the other person half the property as a gift and to appoint his son as steward to oversee the property of his brothers with whom he shares the other half. Similarly, if he wrote a document granting all his property to his wife and another person, he intended to give the other person half the property as a gift and to appoint his wife as steward to oversee the other half of the property for his sons. Ishto, arusa v'ishto, grusha b'matana. Furthermore, it is obvious that if one wrote a document granting all his property to his betrothed wife, whom he did not yet wed, or to his former wife, whom he had divorced, he intended to give it to them as a gift, as he had no reason to have his heirs honor them. Iboilahu bas etzel habanim v'isha etzel ha'achim v'isha etzel b'no ha'bal mahu. A dilemma was raised before the sages. If one wrote a document granting all his property to his daughter before his sons, in a case where he has sons who would inherit from him, or to his wife before his brothers, or to his wife before the husband's sons who are not her sons, what is the halacha? Is it assumed that his intention was to appoint her as a steward or to give her the property as a gift? Amar Ravina mishmei derava b'chulahu lokana lebarbi ishto arusava ishto garusha Rabbi Vira mishmei derava amar b'chulahu kani lebar me'aisha etzel ha'achin isha etzel b'nei ha'baal. Ravina said in the name of Rava that in all these cases the recipient did not acquire the property. Rather, he or she was merely appointed a steward, except for the cases of his death of his betrothed wife and his former wife whom he divorced. By contrast, Rav Avira said in the name of Rava that in all of these cases the recipient acquired the property, except for the cases of his wife before his brothers and his wife before the husband's sons, where he clearly intended only to appoint her as a steward.